All right, so you guys really wanted to get inside the mind of Chamath Palihapitiya,
Yeah.
his views on money and capitalism and how social media is affecting our brains.
Big topics.
Definitely big topics. And we're going to deep dive into a talk that he gave at Stanford Graduate School of Business.
Oh, cool.
I think it was a few years ago.
Okay.
But the content is still incredibly relevant today.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
What?
he does not hold back.
He doesn't.
No, he's very
Interesting.
outspoken. Yeah, and I think it's refreshing to hear somebody who's
Especially in that world.
in that world.
You know, Silicon Valley billionaires.
Yeah, he's been very successful. So
Right.
to hear his perspective,
Right?
it's interesting because
Yeah.
he's really open about his struggles and contradictions.
Absolutely. And that's what makes him so fascinating to listen to, because he doesn't shy away from the complexities of his own journey.
Right, and he doesn't present himself as like...
He's not trying to sell you anything.
Yeah, he's not trying to sell anything. Exactly. Yeah.
Which is refreshing.
It's a breath of fresh air.
So, and I think that really shapes how he views wealth and success.
Okay, where does that come from?
Well, it's rooted in his personal story.
Uh-huh.
So he talks about growing up on welfare in Canada,
Oh, wow.
and he saw firsthand his father battling unemployment
Oh.
and the way that financial stress fueled his depression.
Yeah.
It's really clear that those early experiences,
I mean, how could it not?
I know, they had a profound impact on him.
Right.
And so you can see how being exposed to financial hardship so early
Yeah.
might lead someone to view wealth not as something to just hoard and accumulate,
As like a security blanket almost.
but as a tool to make change.
Absolutely. Like almost like an obligation in a way.
Yes, and he even gives a really interesting personal example
Okay.
of how this belief plays out in his everyday life.
Okay.
So he's known for being a very generous tipper,
Uh-huh.
especially at restaurants.
Yeah, I've heard about this. And he explains that he does this as a way to directly impact people who remind him of his own past. He talks about brown and black-skinned individuals who are working hard to make ends meet.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
And he makes the point that a good Yelp review
Right.
isn't putting food on the table.
Yeah, it's not helping them directly,
Right.
you know?
So it's a very simple act,
Yeah.
but it speaks volumes about his philosophy.
Right.
He sees money as a means to make a difference,
Not an end in itself.
to create a ripple effect of positivity.
I love that. The ripple effect.
And those big tips, he sees them as a way to empower others in a small but tangible way.
That's great. And I think, too, it kind of shows how he views wealth as a responsibility.
Yes.
It's not just about personal gain, but it's about using it to make a positive impact.
And he even talks about seeing the look on those servers' faces, the
Yeah.
surprise and relief.
Oh, I bet.
And you can tell that it's much more than just a transaction for him. It's a way to acknowledge their struggle and to give back. So then we fast forward a little bit, and he talks about his early career.
Okay.
He worked for a billionaire named Terry Matthews in the telecom industry.
Okay.
And Palihapitiya was totally captivated
I bet.
by Matthews' entrepreneurial drive and how he was constantly using his wealth to build new businesses, to innovate.
So not the yacht and the private jet.
No, and he contrasts him with another billionaire he mentions, Michael Copeland, who indulged in very lavish spending and extravagant displays of wealth.
Oh, wow. So it's like two ends of the spectrum.
Right. It's a clear example of the two paths you can take with wealth.
I wonder if he knew both of those guys at the same time, or if it was...
I'm not sure about the timeline, but
Right.
it's like conspicuous consumption
Right.
versus using it as fuel for progress and innovation.
Yeah, and it sounds like for Palihapitiya, there's no question which path he chose.
Yeah, he learned from both of them, but he was clearly drawn to using wealth to create something bigger than himself.
That's great.
And that's where his ambitions with social capital come into play.
Social Capital, that's his company, right?
Yeah, that's his venture capital firm.
Okay.
And he lays out these really bold goals.
Like what?
He wants to employ 10 million people,
Ow.
positively impact 25% of the world's population,
That's huge.
and generate $1 trillion in cumulative revenue,
Okay.
all by 2045.
Wow. So he's thinking really big picture.
Long-term vision.
Yeah, and it sounds like he really wants to reshape capitalism.
Yes.
Like use it as a force for good.
He wants to change the game. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because he's incredibly critical
Of what?
of the fail fast mentality.
Oh, interesting.
that's become so pervasive in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, move fast and break things.
Right. And you would think that somebody with his background
Would be all about it.
would be a huge proponent,
Yeah.
but he sees it as a major obstacle.
I mean, that makes sense when you think about it.
I know.
Because if you're trying to tackle these huge global challenges.
Yeah, like diabetes education or climate change.
Yeah.
You need more than just quick wins and viral products.
Right. You need patience.
Patience and perseverance.
A long-term commitment.
And he even uses a rather colorful analogy
Thank you. Let's hear it.
to drive his point home.
Okay.
He compares the fail-fast mentality to premature ejaculation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's saying that these complex problems,
They need more.
they require sustained effort
Yeah.
and long-term commitment.
Right.
It's not about instant gratification.
Exactly. It's about staying power.
And he backs this up with a personal example.
Okay.
The diabetes business that he started.
Oh, right.
He was inspired to start it because of his father's struggles.
Yeah.
It took 7 years
Wow.
for that business to become viable.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time in the tech world.
Yeah.
It shows his willingness to invest for the long haul,
Right.
even when faced with setbacks.
It's easy to say that you're in it for the long game,
Yeah,
but to actually do it.
and it seems like that willingness to go against the grain,
Yeah.
it's deeply ingrained in him. He's not afraid to question those norms,
Yeah.
even when those norms are what propelled him to success.
Interesting.
And that brings us to what might be the most surprising aspect of his talk.
I'm intrigued. What is it?
His stance on social media.
Oh, wow.
So this is a guy who helped build Facebook into a global phenomenon.
Yeah, right.
And yet,
He's not holding back.
he holds nothing back.
Okay.
In his criticism of the industry he helped create.
That's going to make things awkward at parties.
I know.
Right.
But he goes so far as to say that social media is ripping apart the social fabric of how society works.
Oh, wow, that's strong.
Yeah, and you can tell
He's not joking around.
he's expressing genuine concern
Yeah.
and even guilt about the unintended consequences of these platforms.
It's tough when you create something and then it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, he even uses the phrase, if you feed the beast, that beast will destroy you,
Bro.
to describe the addictive nature of social media.
Yeah, it's just a monster.
Yeah, he sees these platforms as designed to exploit our psychology, and he uses the term short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
I know, to keep us hooked.
Yeah, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling.
Yeah, and while that might be great for engagement metrics,
Right, got to keep those numbers up.
it's not so great for our individual well-being
Or for society.
or the health of society.
It's fascinating that he's willing to say this so publicly.
It is. He's essentially saying that we're sacrificing long-term happiness and well-being
Yeah.
for those fleeting moments of online validation.
I feel like I need to take a break from social media after this.
I know. And
Uh-huh.
he even points to the erosion of civil discourse,
Yeah,
the decline in cooperation and the spread of misinformation,
right. It's hard to know what to believe anymore.
all as consequences of our social media obsession.
Doesn't look like a drug.
Yeah. And the thing is, he's not just talking the talk.
Oh, really?
He's walking the walk.
Okay, how so?
He hasn't used social media in years.
Oh, wow.
And he's even banned his own children from using it.
Oh, that's commitment.
I know it's a pretty radical stance,
Yeah.
especially for someone who is so deeply involved
In building these things.
in the industry. Yeah, but it just shows how seriously he takes these concerns.
Yeah, argue with that.
He's not just warning us about the dangers, he's actively taking steps to protect himself and his family
From the bees.
from the beast. And this leads us to his critique of another powerful force in the tech world,
Okay.
which is,
Venture capitalists.
oh boy,
And you know, he doesn't hold back here either.
I have a feeling he doesn't hold back on much.
No.
Yeah.
He goes so far as to call them soulless cowards.
Wow. He's not making many friends in Silicon Valley, is he?
He's not afraid to ruffle some feathers. Okay, so why does he call them that?
He says that they prioritize short-term gains and personal status over meaningful impact.
Okay.
And it's a harsh assessment,
Yeah.
but it gets to the heart of his frustration
I bet.
with the way that a lot of VCs operate.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that they've become too focused on chasing the next unicorn,
Right. The next big IPO.
the next billion-dollar exit,
Mm.
at the expense of supporting companies that are trying to solve the world's biggest problems.
So it's like short-term thinking again.
Right.
Yeah.
And he wants to see a fundamental shift
And then that's...
in the venture capital landscape.
Wait, what?
He wants to move away from gut feelings and personal networks
Which is how a lot of it works now.
and towards a more systematic,
I can see why he'd want to do that.
data-driven approach.
Okay, data-driven VC. So what does that look like?
Well, he believes that by harnessing the power of data and technology,
Yeah.
we can make the process more efficient,
Okay.
less biased,
Hmm.
and more focused on long-term value creation.
That makes sense.
And that's where his vision for social capital comes in.
Okay, so he's trying to walk the walk.
Right. He wants to build a platform that provides companies with the same kind of abstraction for business insights
What does that mean?
as that AWS provides for computing infrastructure.
Okay, I think I'm going to need an ELI 5 on that one.
Okay, so think of it like this.
Okay.
You don't need to understand how a car engine works
To drive a car?
to drive a car.
Right.
You just need to know how to use the steering wheel.
The gas pedal and the brakes.
Right. And AWS does something similar
For computing power.
for computing power.
Okay.
They take care of all the complex infrastructure.
So companies don't have to worry about it.
Right, so that companies can focus on building their applications and running their businesses.
Okay.
Palihapitiya wants to do the same thing,
But for data.
but for data analysis.
Interesting.
He wants to create a platform that simplifies the process of gathering insights,
Okay.
identifying trends, and making data-driven decisions.
So instead of VCs relying on their gut feelings,
Or chasing hot trends,
they would have this data.
they'd have this vast pool of data to support companies that are truly solving real problems.
Wow, so it's like taking the guesswork out of venture capital.
Exactly, and this goes back to his core belief in rewiring our brains
Back to that.
to think long-term.
Yeah.
Resist that temptation of short-term gains.
And instant gratification.
And he sees this abstraction layer for business insights as a crucial tool in that effort.
That's a big vision.
It is.
And I'm curious, can he actually pull it off?
Well, those are the questions that we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Definitely. So we've talked about Palihapitiya's pretty strong opinions about how traditional venture capital works.
Yeah, he's not a fan.
No, he's not pulling any punches.
But thinks it's broken.
Basically.
So let's unpack what he's actually building with social capital.
Okay, so his own company.
Yeah, he's proposing this idea of creating an abstraction layer for business insights, right? Like that AWS thing we talked about.
Yeah, for computing infrastructure.
But for business.
For business insights.
It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it's ambitious.
Is he basically trying to, like, disrupt the industry that made him a billionaire?
Kind of. Yeah, he's arguing that the current VC model
Which is like,
relies on gut feelings and personal networks.
yeah, and chasing after the next big thing.
That it's flawed.
Flawed how?
He says it's inefficient, it's biased,
Okay.
and ultimately not very good at consistently identifying and supporting impactful companies.
So not actually good at its job.
Yeah, so he's advocating for a more data-driven approach.
Data-driven VC.
Well, what does that look like?
Yeah, how does that actually work?
Well,
What's he doing differently?
so they've invested a lot in building out this sophisticated data platform
Okay.
that helps them identify promising startups.
Okay.
And they're not just looking at, revenue growth,
The usual stuff.
market size.
Yeah, the vanity metrics.
They're digging deeper.
Digging deeper. How?
So they're using data to analyze a company's core operations, their team dynamics,
Okay.
and their potential for long-term impact.
So it's a much more holistic view.
Yes.
Not just about the numbers.
It's more than just the numbers.
But, like, can data really capture all of that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to collect data, but it's another thing to interpret it
Right.
and use it to make good decisions.
And that's what they're trying to do.
So they're trying to use this data to make more informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, is that really enough to change an entire industry?
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, VC has been around for a long time.
And it's very much relationship-driven.
Right. It's a lot of handshakes and backroom deals.
Exactly.
So can you really disrupt that with just data?
Well, Palihapitiya's vision goes beyond just improving the efficiency of venture capital.
Okay, so it's bigger than that.
He wants to use social capital as a force for good.
Okay, like a catalyst for positive change.
Yes, on a global scale.
So it all comes back to that idea of money being a tool for change.
Exactly.
Okay, but how does that translate into their investments?
What kinds of companies are they actually putting money into?
Yeah, what are they looking for?
So they're particularly interested in areas like healthcare education and climate change.
Okay, so like impact investing.
Yeah.
Solving big problems.
They're looking for companies that are tackling big systemic problems.
Right, not just the next trendy app.
And have the potential to create lasting value.
Even if it takes a while.
Even if it takes time to develop and scale.
So they're patient.
Very patient.
That's interesting because most VCs want to see returns like yesterday.
Right. They want those quick exits.
Yeah, IPO or bust.
But Palliapati is playing a different game.
Okay, so he's willing to wait.
He's willing to make big bets on companies that might take years,
Even decades.
even decades, to fully realize their potential.
So he's really trying to change the game.
He's trying to create a new model for capitalism.
One that's more aligned with his values.
Exactly.
And his vision for a more impactful economy.
Right. It's not just about making money.
It's about making a difference.
It's about using money to make a difference.
So it's like impact investing, but on a much larger scale.
Yes.
But is that even possible? I mean, can one company truly shift the tide of an entire industry?
I mean, those are the questions, right?
Yeah, it's a big system.
Can he convince other investors to adopt this long-term data-driven approach?
Right, because if he's the only one doing it.
It's not going to change much.
Exactly.
And then what about the potential downsides of having so much power concentrated in a single firm?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, what if they make bad decisions?
Or if their data is flawed.
All right.
Or if they become too influential.
Yeah, those are all valid concerns.
So it's like he's trying to solve one problem.
But potentially creating new ones.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance.
And Palliapitiya acknowledges that.
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have all the answers.
Which is refreshing.
I know he's still figuring things out as he goes along,
That's honest.
but he's willing to experiment.
Okay.
He's willing to challenge the status quo
Yeah.
and push the boundaries of what's possible.
So he's like a mad scientist, but for good.
I like that.
Yeah.
A mad scientist for good.
Exactly.
And he has this really interesting point that he makes during the talk.
Okay, what is it?
So he's talking about how he thinks traditional VCs rely too heavily on what he calls pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition.
So basically, they're looking for entrepreneurs and companies
that fit a certain mold.
that remind them of past successes.
Okay, so they're looking for the next Facebook.
Or the next Google.
Yeah.
And he argues that this approach can be incredibly limiting
How so?
because it often leads to missed opportunities.
Okay, I see.
He points out that if you look at the most successful tech companies over the past few decades,
Yeah.
there's very little overlap
Oh, yeah.
in the early stage investors who backed them.
Oh, wow. That is interesting.
So he's essentially saying that a lot of venture capital success comes down to luck.
So it's not skill, it's just being in the right place at the right time.
He's acknowledging that it's incredibly difficult to predict which companies will succeed
Mm-hmm.
and which will fail.
But he thinks we can do better.
He thinks we can do better than just relying on gut feelings.
So more data.
More data.
Yeah.
He wants a more systematic, data-driven approach
Okay.
to identifying and supporting these promising companies.
That makes sense.
One that's less reliant on intuition
Mhm.
and more focused on analyzing a company's core fundamentals
Okay.
and their potential for long-term impact.
And he thinks this would also make things more fair.
More democratic,
Yeah.
so that entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds
Right. Who might not have the right connections.
or who are working on ideas that don't fit the traditional mold.
Yeah, they would have a better chance.
Exactly.
So it's not just about making money, it's about making the system more equitable
Yes, and empowering a wider range of entrepreneurs
to build the future.
to build the future.
So it's about more than just the bottom line.
It's about creating a more just and sustainable world.
Yeah, and that brings us back to his vision for social capital as a true partner for their portfolio companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about writing checks.
It's about providing these companies with the resources, the data, the network, the support they need
to really thrive.
to thrive.
So it's a more hands-on approach
Very much so.
than traditional VC.
And he even compares it to a traditional Japanese keiretsu.
A what?
A keiretsu.
I'm not familiar with that term.
So it's a network of interconnected companies
Yeah.
that work together for mutual benefit.
Okay, so like a collaborative ecosystem.
Exactly. And he wants to foster that same spirit of collaboration and long-term thinking.
Within social capital's portfolio.
Yes,
It's an interesting model,
it is.
and it could potentially have ripple effects throughout the entire industry.
Imagine a world where VCs are less focused on quick exits.
And more invested in building lasting businesses.
That solves real problems.
That would be a game changer.
It would.
But is it realistic?
I don't know.
I mean, can he actually pull this off?
Can he convince enough people to change their ways?
Right, because the current system rewards short-term thinking.
And there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah, so it's going to be an uphill battle.
It is. But at least he's trying.
He is.
He's shaking things up.
Yeah, he's definitely making waves.
He's forcing us to rethink the role of capital in society.
And the potential of entrepreneurship.
To drive positive change.
I'm curious to see what happens.
Me too. But before we get too caught up in his vision for social capital,
Okay.
there's one more piece of the puzzle that we need to address.
What's that?
His stance against social media.
Oh, right.
This is a topic that clearly weighs heavily on him.
Given his background at Facebook, it's pretty surprising that he's so critical.
Yeah, so in the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to explore his warnings about the addictive nature of social media
Okay.
and the dangers of short-term thinking,
That dopamine loop.
and his call for a more conscious and deliberate approach to technology.
I'm ready. Let's dive in.
All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, or maybe like the algorithm in the room.
Yeah.
We've explored Palihapitiya's views on money, on capitalism, his vision for social capital, but maybe the most surprising element of his talk is
I know where you're going with this.
his critique of social media.
Yeah.
It's really unexpected, especially given his background.
Right.
This is someone who helped build Facebook into what it is today.
Yeah.
And yet,
He's not holding back at all.
no, he's very open about his guilt, about the impact that it's had on society.
And you can tell it's genuine.
You can tell it's not just him like trying to get attention or...
It's not being a contrarian just for the sake of it.
Right.
It's like he's really wrestling with this.
And he doesn't mince words.
No, he does not.
He says that social media is ripping apart the social fabric of how society works.
And that's a pretty big statement coming from someone who's on the inside.
Right.
It really makes you think.
And he gets into the specifics
Yeah.
about how these platforms are designed to manipulate us.
Okay.
So he talks about how social media exploits our psychology.
Yeah.
Using those short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops
The little hits.
to keep us glued to our screens.
All right.
He even compares it to feeding a beast that will eventually consume us.
Whoa. That's pretty intense.
It's pretty heavy imagery, but it really drives home the point.
About how addictive it can be.
Yes.
We've all been there.
I know, and what's interesting is that he connects this back to his points about short-term thinking.
Oh, yeah.
So he argues that social media is training our brains to seek that instant gratification, which makes it even harder
To focus on the long term.
Right, to delay gratification.
And tackle complex problems that require sustained effort.
Right, it's like we're losing our ability to be patient.
Yeah. And to think long term.
And to work towards something that's bigger than ourselves.
So is he saying that the same mindset that has us, endlessly scrolling?
Yeah. Is also preventing us from building sustainable businesses, addressing climate change, or solving global poverty?
I think so. It's like we're so caught up in the moment.
The dopamine hits.
Yeah, that we're losing sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly.
It's like we're trading long-term fulfillment for these fleeting moments of online validation.
Yeah, and he even draws a parallel to his experience building that diabetes business.
Oh, right. The one that took 7 years.
7 years for it to become viable.
Yeah.
And he contrasts that with the instant gratification of social media.
Where everything is measured in likes and shares.
And viral moments.
It's like a whole different world.
And he's living it.
Oh, right. He doesn't use social media.
He hasn't used it in years.
And he doesn't let his kids use it either.
Which is a pretty drastic step.
Yeah, I mean, most kids are practically raised on social media these days.
I know.
So for him to just cut it out completely,
It's a big statement.
yeah, it shows how seriously he takes this.
He's putting his money where his mouth is.
Exactly. He's not just talking about it. He's actually doing something.
And he even mentions that his friends give him a hard time about it.
Oh, I bet.
But he stands firm.
Good for him.
He believes that our collective well-being is at stake.
Yeah, and he's not wrong.
And it's not just about individual well-being.
Right.
He's worried about society as a whole.
Yeah, what are some of his concerns?
He talks about the erosion of civil discourse,
The
rise of misinformation, and the decline in trust.
Right. It's like we're all living in our own little echo chambers.
And he uses this really chilling example.
Oh, what is it?
A WhatsApp hoax in India that led to a series of lynchings.
Oh, my God.
And it's a reminder that these aren't just like abstract concerns.
Yeah.
They have real-world consequences.
That's scary.
It is.
So what can we do about it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Palihapitiya admits that he doesn't have all the answers.
Which is fair.
But he urges us to really think about our relationship with these platforms, to do some soul-searching.
To be more mindful.
And it's up to each of us to decide how we want to engage with these tools.
Or if we want to engage at all.
Exactly.
That's a tough question.
It is. He's not advocating for a complete abandonment of technology.
Right.
He recognizes that it has its benefits.
But we need to be more aware.
More conscious, more deliberate.
Yeah, not just mindlessly scrolling.
Right.
So it's like a call to action.
It is. It's a call to reclaim our agency in this digital age.
To take back control.
To step back from the constant barrage of notifications.
And the curated content.
And reconnect with our values, our goals, and our sense of purpose.
I think that's a great message to end on.
Yeah, so where does this leave us?
I think the beauty of a deep dive like this is that it's not about giving you all the answers.
It's about giving you the information to make your own choices.
To form your own opinions.
And I think Palihapitia's story is such a powerful reminder that even the people who have achieved incredible success in the tech world,
they're struggling with these same issues.
They're grappling with these unintended consequences.
And it's up to all of us to figure out how to move forward.
He's using his platform to challenge the status quo.
To start a conversation.
And encourage us to think more critically about the role of technology in our lives.
Whether you agree with him or not, you have to admire his willingness to speak out.
And to challenge the very industry that made him wealthy.
Yeah, that takes guts.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to shape the future we want to see.
Both online and offline.
And that starts with being aware of the forces that are shaping our thoughts, our behaviors, our world.
Well said.
So we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
And some things to ponder.
And now it's time for you to go out there.
And make your mark on the world.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
See you then.